This week on Story, we're joined by acclaimed writer and showrunner Noah Hawley, the brilliant mind behind television series Fargo and Legion.
When you take these moments from the Coen brothers films that people are so familiar with, and you use them in a different way, then the audience is both watching something familiar and something completely new at the same time. And so two parts of your brain are active. You're both remembering and discovering at the same time, which I find is a really fascinating thing to play with.
Hawley discusses his approach to finding and preserving the essence of a beloved film when adapting it for the small screen, while bringing his own point of view to the source material.
Tell me a little bit about the Noah origin story, because your mom was a writer. She
Yes.
was an author. So growing up that way must have given you some discipline, interest, so on, before going to Sarah Lawrence and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a third generation writer. My grandmother, who emigrated from Ukraine when she was, five years old, and had an 8th grade education. She ended up becoming the assistant to Walter Lippmann, who ran the New York World in New York. And she was a playwright, and she wrote a column for them. And then my mother started out writing, her first published book was A Child's Guide to Freud, which was the Oedipal Complex as a children's book. Came out in 1964, and a New Yorker cartoonist illustrated it. And she ended up moving into nonfiction. But she didn't have a college degree. My grandmother had the 8th grade education. I never saw writing as something that you needed qualifications for, I guess was part of it. You just decide that you're a writer, and then you have to earn it, right? And if you're not going to get an MFA, or you learn by doing. And so I think there's 3 or 4 novels that went in a drawer before I wrote the one that I published. I was going to be a rock star, but turns out I'm not a night person, so that wasn't a great use of my time.
But Noah really is, like, as far as a screenwriter and the different kinds of projects, it's sort of like a combination of Gershwin, Dylan, and John Lennon. Like, everything is original, everything is fresh, and you have such a remarkable confidence going forward. Is that achieved as you go and develop, or is it just part of your psyche? Like, how do you develop that kind of confidence going into a room, putting together a staff?
Yeah. I hadn't really thought about it, and then when we were doing the 4th year of Fargo in Chicago, I had a dinner with Jason Schwartzman and my family, and he asked me a similar question, which is like, how do you do so much? And my wife said, well, he has no doubt, no creative doubt. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because I really don't. When I have an idea, that's the idea, and if a better idea comes along, then I can embrace that. You have the idea, and, like Billy Bob's going to walk into that building and he's going to shoot it up, but we're never going to go inside. The camera's just going to track along outside. That's an idea that came out in the writer's room, and I never questioned it again. Maybe we should be inside.
And then whisper sweet nothings to the other glass. Okay. And in 1 week, just stop. But listen, a week later.
Can I help you, sir?
Was that shot? Oh my God! Oh my God! Drop it!
And a lot of it, has to do with comedy as well, right? The joke, right? And the joke is funny. There's something organic about the joke that's funny, and you can try to refine it, and then at a certain point it stops working, And that's always the problem with development, right? Is that if you write a script that spends a lot of time in development, the jokes stop being funny. To the executives.
Right.
And then they go, well, we can make this better. And you're like, no, it works. It worked the first time. It's going to work when it's a film, but people just want to keep working things. So that's my secret strategy, which is hard to imbue in other people, which is just like, my motto is, what else can I get away with? And play is important to me also in the translation of script to screen. It's like there's a lot of work that goes into it and a lot of prep, but you really just want to get on the set with the actors and see what it really is and wants to be.
Let's jump into Fargo and Legion specifically. That a lot of people go into a writer's room, they'll put together a staff, and you could tell us a little bit about that, and they're going into that room to discover what the show is. For me, and everything I've seen of your work, you go into the room with the idea baked.
I didn't just do it for my show, I did it for Heart. I don't know if you remember, like when I was hired as a story editor or something on Bones, which was it's a procedural, right? It's a comedic procedural, and that's not my thing. But when I met with Hart, he said, you're going to learn how to be a producer on the show, which was what I really wanted because I had already been writing pilots and I really wanted to learn how to make something. And, he was very true to his word. And so, yeah, for me, there's a lot of ideas that go into something and the reasons that I'm telling the story the way that I do. And
the Fargo thing's remarkable because your show is an original show, even though it was based on that film. But as seasons went by, I always noticed you'll pull, there was a scene from the original movie where it becomes a touchstone for something in episodes. And I was looking at the season 5 trailer and I noticed a tiny moment of that at the break-in through the door.
For her knee surgery. So yeah.
She's like best dog mom in the world. I was telling her, I'm like, your dogs are going to be so sad when you go back to work.
So sad.
Spoiled right now.
They're going to be used to her being home and taking care of them, and yeah. Dexter likes, when they say dogs start to look like their owners after a little while.
right.
Yeah, how she deals with it is
and
different.
season 5 is the most direct homage to the movie. She is sitting on the sofa knitting, watching the morning show when the guy shows up in the mask. But who she is and who the guys are and what happens is very different. What I found, in making Fargo that was really fascinating to me is that when you take these moments from the Coen brothers films that people are so familiar with and you use them in a different way, then the audience is both watching something familiar and something completely new at the same time. And so two parts of your brain are active. You're both remembering and discovering at the same time, which I find is a really fascinating thing to play with for an audience. And it's not something we're used to in watching. It's a more active experience as a viewer.
In Legion, because the character is quite fractured and mentally ill, you're doing that too. You're playing him in 2 different time periods, and it's interesting tracking those episodes to episodes. How did you sort of formulate that from its origin?
So I started out in when FX asked me if there was anything in the X-Men universe that was interesting to me, I didn't start off with a character. I met with Lauren Schuler-Donner, the producer, and Simon Kinberg, who was the writer-producer. And I just started calling Simon, and we would talk about some things. And I had this feeling like, what if you made Breaking Bad where you have a character who you're not sure is he going to be a hero or a villain, but instead of a regular villain, it's a supervillain. But it has to work as a drama. It has to work dramatically. And so I found this character that the show is based on, who in the comic books is Professor Xavier's son, and he has schizophrenia, basically, a multiple personality disorder. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because then if he's the sort of unreliable narrator, and he doesn't know what's real and what's not real, and whether he actually is ill or whether it's just his powers, there's something really that you can play with there. And then if he has this sort of monster inside of him and you take the monster out, now he thinks every decision that I make is good because what made me make bad decisions is gone.
Right.
And so then his sense of himself becomes unrealistic.
spit, right? Human spit? Maybe he ate yogurt.
I noticed that you worked with a director I've worked with a bunch, Mike Uppendahl. And I really like Mike.
Yeah, Mike is great. Mike is great. He
Can you
comes
talk
up
a
with
little bit about toning directors and tone of your shows?
Yes.
You know, tone of Fargo, and explaining that to whether it be network or a director you're working with, yourself, you know?
Yeah, it's a tough challenge, and a lot of it, you know, a lot of it is the final cut. You know, I mean, the final tone is going, all right, well, you shot it this way, but I need it to work a different way. But you hope to avoid that. You know, Mike is always great, and you know, I have a few go-to directors who, you know, I mean, the biggest thing is, like, you can't play the comedy. You have to play the drama. You know what I mean? And you have to play the character. But I do, you know, a tone meeting for people who don't know, as you're, you know, when new directors come on, they need to understand how to make your show. So it becomes really critical to sit down with the director and that whole team and explain, go through the script. I start off talking about what are the ideas that are in this season, you know? What is the show about? Why are these scenes here? And then you get into the characters and, you know, and the actors, if I've worked with the actors of you know, yet of going through, you know, he likes a lot of information. All she wants to hear is faster, you know, and, you know, then go through page by page and just really talk through how it wants to be. And, you know, I write very graphically. The scripts that I write will say, like, you know, angle on this character, close up. You know, it's written cinematically so that as you read it, you're seeing. And then, you know, the Coen brothers, of course, they don't do coverage, right? They'll storyboard and they shoot only what they need. And so it becomes very important with the directors to say, well, if you're coming from being a TV director, you're used to doing wide, medium, close, over, you know, I don't need all that.
Right.
You know, I need you to have a point of view, you know, but also to understand that the point of view, character-wise, that you're entering a scene with isn't necessarily the person you're leaving a scene with in an ensemble show, right? So how are you getting into a scene? How are you getting out of a scene? I had in the first season of Fargo, you know, there's this whole thing about Martin Freeman and you know, he killed his wife, but he concocts this story in which his brother actually was having an affair with his wife, and he's got to go to the house and plant some unmentionables in the gun locker, and then he actually puts a handgun in his nephew's backpack so that he gets caught, so the cops come to, like, this whole thing. And then, you know, Odenkirk and Martin Freeman have this, like, 7-page scene where Odenkirk's going, like, oh, your brother was cheating, you know, and it walks him through the whole thing, and the director was like, well, it's a 7-page scene in a room of two people talking, so should we put some security cameras up and then I could be in the other room? I was like, no, we're 6 hours into this thing. We've earned the right. The audience, all the audience wants is this and that.
Right. Well said.
You know, keep the simple things simple.
Right.
So that you can make time for yourself to do the more complicated things.
Yeah, and I think you did that brilliantly with Billy Bob's character too. You know, in that first season, it's just it was so still.
Yeah.
And that's what you wanted, because he was just. But was he experienced from having worked with the Coens that he understood the coverage you were going for?
He was. You know, he made the man who wasn't there with them, where, you know, his. You know, if he even cracked a smile during a take, Joel would be like, oh, you're feeling rambunctious today. You know what I mean? Like, it was such a still performance. I don't know, one of the worst moments I had a director who was doing the episode where Billy gets arrested and he transforms himself into this pastor from Minnesota, right? And he does it by, you know, he's got his hands cuffed behind him, and there's the desk sergeant who puts his glasses down, and then when they uncuff him, he turns around and picks up the glasses and puts them on. Like, he changes his hair, and then he opens his mouth, and it's this Minnesota accent, and the director wanted to meet with Billy and talk about this transformation. I was like, oh, I better be there, right?
Yeah.
You're talking to Sling Blade right now,
yes,
right?
Exactly,
so,
yes.
And Billy just sat there, and he's like, so Minnesota accent. What do you want, like an 8? And I was like, yeah, an 8 sounds good.
Yeah, there you
So-
go. There's tone. There you go. Like,
Yeah, it's tone. It's like,
act.
well, it's like I've made 2 things with John Hamm now, the movie Lucy in the Sky and then the season of Fargo. And John doesn't have a lot of process. He doesn't want a lot of process.
Right.
You know, I wait for him. If he's like, what do you think about this? You know, I'll say great. But I don't impose conversations about the meaning of things on him because I can tell he doesn't want that. Schwartzman is very like, text you in the middle of the night, you know. I just think there's a lot of creative doubt there, you
Right.
know, and it's a very exciting process with him as well because you know it is exciting to talk about this stuff, but you can't impose that on.
That
on the
season was so
actors.
great for Chris Rock too. Oh
It-
my
it
God.
was.
It was great to see him be an actor. Sometimes too, I imagine when you're casting, you're thinking about who's hard, who's soft, who's, you know, and for good reason. You could say soft and it be something that's a real positive. Like, I remember a scene from season 1 where Billy Bob's in the car, windows rolls down, there's Colin Hanks standing there, and you feel the vulnerability for his character. And I'm like hanging on the edge of my seat. He's going to be killed. It's going to be terrible.
Evening, officer.
Evening. License and registration, please.
We could do it that way. You ask me for my papers, I tell you it's not my car, that I borrowed it, see where things go from there. You could do that. Or you could go get in your car and drive away.
Now, why would I do that?
Because some roads you shouldn't go down. Because maps used to say there'd be dragons here. Now they don't. But that don't mean the dragons aren't there.
Dad, come in, Dad, over.
You step out of the car, please, sir.
How old's your kid?
That was when I knew that FX was that we were going to make a great show together because you know you have this 70-minute episode, you know, in which you see Billy and he kills the sheriff that you love and he does all this horrible stuff, and then he's driving away and he gets pulled over by this completely new character, right, in the last minute of the show. And you know, because Colin Hanks is so great, I mean, you know, and we're introducing a major character, but we're doing it in this one moment. He's on the radio with his daughter, you know, Vikings are up, whatever,
Yeah.
you know, homework, and then he gets out, and Billy says what he says about there used to be dragons, and you know, you're like, he's going to kill him. Like, this guy has killed everybody, and he's going to kill this guy, and so it does. We earned, for a guy you just met, we earned a really emotional moment, you know, that
Truly.
then plagues him going forward. So, you know, it's you got to trust your audience, you know, and FX is very good at that, and not a lot of places are.
You know, look, you work with some brilliant artists as well, production design, wardrobe, so on. Do you lean on them? Do you feel like they bring you the answers that you want? And are you able to assign how a producer can help you?
100%. My goal is not to do everybody's job. You know, I really don't want to do everybody's job. And everything's writing, you know, on some level. When I had the wrench and numbers character in season 1 of Fargo, it's like, well, all right, so those guys, they have to have, if you're going to try to make a new myth, you have to make it mythic.
Talk a little bit about conceiving Alien, which is your current project.
I've been asked a couple of times, and I did a Star Trek project that we didn't get to make, but to take something original and remake it as something original. You know what I mean? And so I always look at, well, what did the original make me feel? And then how can I recreate those feelings in the audience by telling a different story, you know? And so for me, there were a few things about Alien that made it interesting, because it's not just a monster movie, right? I mean, it is the great monster movie, but there's that moment where you realize that Ian Holm is an android, where you go, oh, this is really interesting now, because this is humanity trapped between the primordial past and the AI future, and they're both trying to kill us. You know what I mean? There's nowhere to go. A 2-hour movie, you know, you can set it up, and then it's just about, are they going to survive? Right. But if you're making a series, are they going to survive? You can't sustain it. Right. I mean, even if you have 60% of the best action horror on television, you still have 40% of what are we talking about? Right, exactly. You know, so, and so, you know, I had this idea about how to explore that moment in Earth history, right? Because the show does involve the creatures coming to Earth, you know, which is like, well, what is this moment on Earth, technology-wise, and where are we? And the question that science fiction always tends to ask is, does humanity deserve to survive, right? So that seems like a really interesting question to continue to explore. And, you know, there is a sort of glut of AI stuff right now, and when I say AI, you know, we're playing with some of that, but it's also more about, you know, transhumanism and you know, just the question of what is the future of the human race, or do we not have one? But you also have to understand that, you know, there is your pure artistry of process, but people have to pay to see it in one form or another. You know, there is an audience that you have to honor in one way or another, and sometimes you're honoring them by giving them the credit to be sophisticated, and you're going, well, I'm not going to spoon feed you this. You're going to watch that first episode of Legion, and you're not going to understand everything, and that's going to be interesting to you. And as long as you trust me that as we learn things, you're going to learn them too, you know, then I'll keep your focus. But Legion was a show that had a smaller audience every season, right? You know, because it was not, you couldn't, it wasn't a 2-device show.
It also wasn't lay back and be entertained. It was lean forward and participate. You know, you need to be thinking, and you know, and I'll just say to you too, coming off of what Noah said, as a person who finds IP and becomes confident in it, when I meet with a writer, like when I met with Craig Silverstein about Turn Washington Spies, I was very confident in what I thought it could be. And then 2 weeks later, Craig came back, and then he pitched me with tremendous confidence what it's going to be, as opposed to what I thought. But you know, I also had the confidence to know he knows better. Okay, so the whole industry, I think, that we work in is one where you develop the muscle you're asking about of just being confident in it, what you created, what you found. And you have to be that way. Even if somebody's going to completely reinterpret what you're thinking, that's the job of a showrunner. So you have to have that kind of confidence. There's no question.
Yeah, it's a process, and you have to be open to the idea that there's a better version. You know, that you can do better.
Maybe there's a death in the family. Isn't the better thing, the more humane thing, to say that should be forgiven? Isn't that who we should be?
You've been watching Film to TV Adaptations, a conversation with Noah Hawley on OnStory. OnStory is part of a growing number of programs in Austin Film Festival's OnStory project that also includes the OnStory radio program, podcast, book series, and the OnStory archive, accessible through the Whitliff Collections at Texas State University. To find out more about OnStory and Austin Film Festival, visit onstory.tv or austinfilmfestival.com.